So before we go forward, Sarah, let me read out the safe harbor statement for everyone. So both the speaker and host, we are organizing this meetup in individual capacity. We are not representing our employers here. Sarah will be sharing her practical experience, her knowledge with everyone, but this presentation is strictly meant for learning purpose. If the same solution does not work in your requirement, Sarah or myself don't hold any responsibility. You have to do complete functional analysis or integration analysis before jumping on the conclusion. Last thing, we are not going to make any promotional activities here. We will be talking all around MuleSoft and Salesforce. So without taking more time, Sarah, now the time has come. I'll request you to start your presentation. And before that, thank you so much for doing it for New York City community and taking out time from your busy schedule. I'm highly grateful, Sarah. Thank you so
Sure.
much.
No, you're most welcome. My pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
So,
Sarah.
okay, yeah, I'll give a brief introduction about myself. So basically, I have over 12 years of Salesforce experience. I started out as a developer, then I moved to a technical architect role about 5, 6 years ago. I have over a year of MuleSoft experience, almost two now. I have 15 Salesforce certifications. I have my one MuleSoft certification. I'm a MuleSoft mentor. I also lead a Salesforce Women in Tech user group out here in Princeton, New Jersey. Recent Salesforce Golden Hoodie winner, and then I write a blog just about Salesforce and MuleSoft. So that's my introduction. This is the agenda that we will be getting into today. So we're going to talk about some of the different type of APIs. I'm going to say some because there's so many. We're going to cover some of the main ones. And then we're going to talk about them at a high level, what those different APIs for. And then we will also be actually demonstrating to you some very simple use cases, very, very simple projects in Anypoint Studio, showing those connectors and how we're using them in Anypoint Studio. So let's get started. We're going to be covering these APIs today. So basically, we're all familiar with APIs. Everyone from MuleSoft will be familiar with APIs, but basically, they're just a way for applications to programmatically interact with each other. And in particular, we're going to cover the APIs and how they will interact with the Salesforce platform. So over the course of years, Salesforce has evolved, and they have a lot of different APIs for different use cases. So some of the APIs are the REST API, the SOAP API, then we have the metadata API, we have Chatter API, we have Bulk API, we have Streaming API, and there's a lot more. So Salesforce.
Sarah, sorry to interrupt you. I have a request from Shabana. Can we have a full-size slides, please?
Sure. Actually, I have to toggle between the presentation and project, so I will probably have to minimize it again. I can do it now, but I'll have to probably change it when I get into the actual. Okay, so that's good.
Yeah, that's good, Sarah. Thank you so much.
Okay, so yeah. So basically, I was talking about that Salesforce is a cloud-based multi-tenant environment. And due to the fact that it's a multi-tenant shared environment, there are certain government limits that are imposed on each Salesforce org that you work with. And there are very specific limits around APIs as well. And a list of those governor limits is available here. So I've put in a link here. You can go and see like the different limits that are there for each org and each edition of Salesforce that you have. And then I've also put in a link for those of you interested about the different APIs and where you can read more documentation. So we're going to start out with talking about the Salesforce REST API. So the REST API is, everyone's familiar with REST APIs, but for Salesforce, it provides a very powerful, convenient, and simple web services API for interacting with the Salesforce Lightning platform. There's one thing to keep in mind, but if you want to cover a lot of records or want to do bulk processing, then REST API is probably not the choice that you want to go with. You would want to look into the Bulk API. which is also based on REST principles, but it's optimized for larger data sets. REST API uses the same underlying data model, and it uses the same standard objects as those in the Salesforce SOAP API. And then each resource in the REST API is identified with the URI and is accessed using standard HTTP methods like get, head, patch, delete. And then there is a Salesforce tool available as well. If you want to just look into APIs, like a high level interact with the REST API, there's a Salesforce tool called Workbench. It's a cloud-based tool in which you can just go around and navigate and look at the APIs. And then obviously you have Postman. You can interact with those APIs using Postman as well. So I'm gonna minimize this and I'm gonna show you actually the Workbench so you can kind of see it in action. So I have a sample record here. I'm gonna just show you what it looks like in Workbench. So basically Workbench is a cloud-based tool. You just log in to your Salesforce org and then it works over OAuth. So completely cloud-based, you don't need to install anything. If you go here, there's a REST Explorer here, and it gives you the options for interacting with all these different methods. So in this case, I'm gonna just show you, I'm gonna get like details about this specific record. So it's just showing you if I use the API call using the REST API, this is how I will get details about this specific account. So this is showing the API version. This is showing that I'm getting an object. This is showing the object that I'm getting, which is an account. And this is the Salesforce unique identifier for that record. And it's going to pull up here like all the details about that record, all the fields that are populated. So it's a very simple tool and it's a nice way to interact with the APIs. And then if there's a link here for you to download for the Postman API. So you have the Salesforce APIs for Postman. You can click on this link to download details about that. Okay, so let me go back here. So that's about the REST API. Next, we're gonna get into the SOAP API. So everyone's familiar with SOAP, you know, SOAP is XML based and it's similar use cases as the REST API. In Salesforce, you use it to create, update, retrieve, delete records. And you can use it to interact with Salesforce standard and custom objects. And then the SOAP API for Salesforce supports more than 20 different calls today. And obviously it's SOAP based, XML based. And then on the back end, a lot of the Mule processors that you see in the Salesforce connector are using SOAP API in the back end. So next, we're just going to get into a very simple example using the SOAP API in a project. So we're going to basically just query data from one org, and then we're just going to insert that record into another different org, just showing the SOAP API and these connectors. Just going to bring up AnyPoint Studio. Just give me a second. Okay, can you guys see AnyPoint Studio?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. It's starting up, so it will take a minute. We all know how fast AnyPoint Studio is. Okay. So looks like it's running. I'm just gonna bring up Postman now, and this is the endpoint I have running. It's called SFSOAP. So I'm just gonna send a request here, and fingers crossed that it works, which it did in here. So basically, it's showing you, you know, there's no exceptions. It's showing you that it's a success message, and it's showing you the IDs of the records that were created in the destination org. So this is the payload structure. You can look at it. In this case, there were like multiple records that we were inserting. So if you look in here, there's a limit of 5. So that's probably why you see 5 records that were created here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that's why you have 5 records that got inserted as a result. So we queried data from one Salesforce org, and then we inserted that data into a different Salesforce org. And if I look into the org, okay, give me a second. Just give me a second to log into the other org.
Yeah, sure, Sarah.
Give me a second. Okay, so this is the org, the destination org, and in this case, we created account records. So I'm just going to show you one of them. But basically, in Salesforce, every object and record has a unique identifier, which is this 18-digit unique ID. So if we go to accounts, um, and say we click on any account, but basically, at the top, this is the unique identifier for any account. And that's how Salesforce kind of interacts with all the records, is based on this 18-digit unique ID. So I'm just going to paste in one of the IDs that we saw from the call. So you will see, like, it's showing that it's got created, and it was created just now. This is in Pacific time, but it's showing that this record was just inserted. So this was the SOAP API example. We will go to the next one in the presentation. So you can all see, like, in the project, in any point, I was using the standard Salesforce connector. So these are all standard Salesforce connectors that you get in MuleSoft. You have all these different processors under that. We were using just 2 different processors in this case. We used a query processor, and then we used a create processor. So next, we're going to get into the bulk API. So bulk API is also based on REST-based principles, but the bulk API is optimized for loading or deleting or updating large data sets. So you can.
Sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. I think I have a good question from Kirti.
Okay.
So she is asking, how can we identify whether it is a SOAP API or a REST API?
From where? For a use case?
Uh, she did not mention. Yes, from a use case. That's what he's saying. She's saying.
So basically, if you are using the MuleSoft connectors, like I mentioned, under the hood, if you're using the standard built-in connectors in MuleSoft or Salesforce, they are based on the SOAP API on the back end. So in this case, when we were running the project for that query and create, it's using SOAP API on the back end, because that's how MuleSoft has implemented the standard processors.
Thanks for that, Sarah.
Sure. Yep. Okay. So the next one we're covering in here is the bulk API. And like I said, it's based for large data sets. You can use it to query all, insert, update, upsert, or delete many large volume of records. And it is based asynchronously, so it's not synchronous. So in this case, before, with example we were running, when we sent a request, we immediately got back a response. We immediately got back the IDs. The bulk API does not work that way. It is asynchronous. So what it does in the back, when you actually run it, it processes records in different batches. And then when you send a bulk API request, basically on the backend, it creates a job. And that job is split into one or more batches depending on the size of records that you have. And then you get back basically a job ID. And then you can look at that job ID. You have processors in MuleSoft also to see the status of that job, or you can go into the Salesforce org as well to see how that job is progressing. So we're gonna there's different options for that as well. So batches can be set up to run in parallel, or you can run it serially, like one by one. It depends on your use case. Sometimes it is okay to run them in parallel, you can run faster. But if you are using records that are dependent on one another, then you cannot run it in parallel. So suppose if you're inserting account and contact records, you would not want to run it in parallel because you want the account IDs before you can insert the contact IDs, because the parent object is an account for the contact. So in that case, you would not run it in parallel. But if you're only inserting, say, accounts, it might make sense in your use case to run it in parallel. So next, we're going to just do a very simple example that will show us how we use the bulk API in MuleSoft with the pre-built processors again. We're going to be showing you, we will read like a file from a CSV file on my local machine. It has a couple of records, and then it's going to use this bulk API version 2 to insert the records into Salesforce using that file, reading that file, and then just show the output. So we're using bulk API version 2 in this use case. There is bulk API version 1, but it's recommended to use version 2 because it takes care of a lot of the intricate details, like splitting into batches automatically itself and how it handles the processing automatically. So that's why it's recommended to use bulk API version 2 rather than 1. So I'm gonna have to minimize this again. And I'm gonna go to AnyPoint Studio. So this is the example we were talking about. I'm gonna run the project. Okay. Okay, it is running. And this is the endpoint. We're gonna go into Postman. We're gonna run it. So here you can see this is the way it returns a result. But the main thing that we're looking for in here is the job ID. So here you can see this is the ID, and it's showing you a state that it is in progress. So basically it's not completed. It created it. It's showing the user that created it, showing you the content type, which is a CSV file. And this is the job ID. So basically we're gonna look this up in Salesforce. So if you can look here, I'll show my screen. So in Salesforce, you go to setup, there's a place, it's called bulk data load jobs. This is where you will see any bulk API jobs that are running. And you can see like, this is the ID that I just had from that job ID. So it's running, it's showing that I submitted it. It's showing it started at this time, it ended. It's showing the status is complete, and it's showing I'm using bulk API version 2 on the back. My operation is an insert. I'm inserting accounts, and I have 7 records in my CSV file. If you click on the job ID, it's going to show you further details. It's going to show you the batches which we talked about. It splits into batches automatically itself. So in this case, it split into two batches, but since it was a small file, only had 7 records, it processed it in the first batch itself. Showing the progress is 100% complete, and now the status is changed to job complete. So that was the bulk API. We're gonna go back here to the presentation. So again, the other thing to point out, this is all standard Salesforce processors. We're not doing anything custom. The next one we're covering is the metadata API. So metadata API is basically used to, is anything, Neeraj?
Yeah, Sarah. A couple of questions actually, Sarah, before we move to metadata.
Okay.
So, uh, Ashutosh is asking one question. For bulk APIs, do we use only CSV support? No, sorry. He's asking, does the CSV is only, one second, let me just read it completely. For bulk APIs, Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
input can be only CSV file or there can be JSON or XML or something else also.
Mostly for Salesforce, when you're inserting, it's recommended to use CSV for like bulk data loads. Like even if you use data loader and stuff, CSVs are the usual way to insert the data. And JSON also, like you cannot have like tremendous payloads, because metadata API use cases are mostly like if you have like really large data sets, like in thousands or millions, that is where you're recommended to use metadata API. If you want to use, if it's less records, a smaller payload with JSON, you just recommended to use REST or so.
Okay. Shravan has one question. Salesforce allows data in the format of objects only, or does it allow arrays too?
You can insert an array of objects, like you can insert multiple objects. Is that the question?
I think so. I think you answered it, Sarah, but I'll
Okay.
wait for 10 seconds from Shravan if he has any follow-up question on that.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, even in the use case we did with the SOAP API, we were extracting 5 records and inserting 5 records. So basically, it was an array. And the payload I showed you had an array as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. We can proceed.
All right. Okay, so metadata API is basically used to retrieve, deploy, create, update, or delete customization information. So it's actually not used to interact with data, it's used to interact with the different custom object definitions or other metadata about the Salesforce org itself. So we always interact with the metadata, not the data in Salesforce for metadata API. So, you can use it when you want to retrieve, say, information about, say, what objects you have in your org, or if you have account objects, like what is the different fields you have, because every organization can customize itself and have custom fields. So if you want to retrieve specific information about the customizations in the org, you would use the metadata API. And metadata API is also using XML, I believe. It uses XML metadata files. So you can even update metadata by using the metadata API, and then the payload has to be in a specific XML format. For metadata API, you do have to use a file. Typically, you process a file. An XML file is what you pass to do the processing for metadata API. And then there's a limit that you can retrieve or deploy up to 10,000 files at a time. So for metadata API, we're gonna show a very simple example. So I'm gonna stop the server. So we have a very simple metadata processor we're using. It's a describe metadata. Basically, it's just going to return about the metadata we have in our Salesforce org. So to set it up, you just here are all the different processors. Just so you know, there's a lot of them, and they're not sorted by like the type of API. That's a mixture here. You have bulk API here, you have the SOAP API, you have metadata API, you have like the different APIs mixed in the processor here, processors. Okay, deployed. Case of metadata is the one we want to run. So we're gonna run that. Basically, you can see it's showing you all the metadata objects in the org. It's gonna be a huge list, but it's showing you basically installed packages. It's showing you you have custom labels in your org, you have static resources, you have certificates. These are all different backend metadata API objects you have in Salesforce, showing you Apex components. You have Aura definition bundle, queues. It's a very lengthy long list, but basically it's showing you all these different metadata entities in this particular Salesforce org. And then there's other methods for like different things to do with metadata API available in the processors as well. But our example, we're just retrieving all the different metadata objects available in this org. Any questions on this one, Neeraj, before we can?
We had one, just give me 1 second, Sarah. Let me try to find it out. Yes. Sovik is asking one question, Sarah.
Okay.
How can we make the package.xml for a specific config retrieve? Is there any specific way, or we should just refer to metadata API help documentation?
I am not sure I understand the question.
Is there any way where we can make changes to package.xml? Or we can take this question in the
Specific,
end if you want, Sarah.
yeah, maybe we can discuss it in Q&A. I might need to ask like
Yeah,
exactly what use case we're talking about. We can definitely cover that.
yeah, we can cover it in the end, and I can open up the mic for Sovik that time, and then he can interact on this particular question. Perfect. Thank you, Sarah.
Sure.
Manju has one question. In real-time scenario, what are the use cases for metadata API?
It can honestly vary a lot. One example can be, suppose you need to interact with all the different fields at runtime. You need to find out all the different fields for a specific object, say you're inserting into, or the different record types that Salesforce has for accounts. And suppose you want to do different things for different record types. In that case, to read the different record types for an object, you would need to use a metadata API because it's going to vary in each org, right? So you would need to use a metadata API to say retrieve what record types you have and what the record type IDs are. That's just one very simple use case, but it just varies by use case. But things like figuring out the record types you have, figuring out what custom fields you have on an object, those are all things for which you would need to use a metadata API.
Thank you for that, Sarah.
Sure.
No further question.
All right. Okay, let's continue. Um, we already talked about this. We covered this example. So we're gonna cover next is the Salesforce REST API composite resources. So this is part of the Salesforce REST APIs, but basically it lets you composite resources to improve your application performance, and it minimizes the number of round trips between the client and server. So this is also available in MuleSoft, but this is not the standard Salesforce connector. It's actually a different Exchange module. It's called Salesforce Composite module. You can retrieve from Exchange. And basically, the use case behind using composite resources is if you want to execute a series of dependent REST API requests in a single call. And so suppose in the old use cases, if I wanted to insert account and contacts, if I was using say the REST API or SOAP API, I would first send an insert request to insert the accounts. I would get back my IDs for that account, and then I would use those IDs to insert the related contacts. So that would be round trip. I'll be going back and forth. But what the composite REST API does is that it lets you combine all those things into a single call. You can basically insert accounts and you can get back related IDs and you can insert the relevant contacts in one call. So that definitely minimizes your round trip for those particular use cases, and it minimizes the API calls you're making into Salesforce as well. I've listed like details about the composite resources here for Salesforce. So next we're gonna go into a simple use case in AnyPoint Studio. Basically, we're gonna query account and contact data in a local MySQL database on my machine, we have to do two transforms in this case. And I'm gonna open up any point so we can look at that a little bit. So this one is very simple use case. I'm like basically retrieving account and contact information from a local MySQL database on my machine. And for the simplicity of this call, I'm just limiting it to one. Then this is the first transform structure. Basically, you need to convert it to an S object tree structure. So I have a JSON transform. You can like read up all the information about like the expected structure in that document link that I sent you. So this is the first transform. I need to put it in this particular structure, and then this create as object tree, but it takes a Java based record. So I'm going to do another transform to put it into that format. And then this is the S object tree connector. So basically, if you look at here, it's a little different. This is not the Salesforce default processors we were using. This is not the Salesforce connector. There's a specific one just for the composite REST API. And it has all these other different methods. But for this use case, we're only going to cover creating the S object tree. So I'm going to run this. Okay, deployed. Okay. My apologies. I was actually having issues with this project. I had it set up and then my studio crashed in the middle and I lost all my changes. So let me see here.
That's fine, Sarah. No worries.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if it's not working, I probably would not waste too much time on it. I'm just gonna see if it's a issue with my SQL server or if it's something with connectivity related.
That's absolutely fine, Sarah. No worries about
Yeah.
it.
Okay, no problem. But you can see basically the concept of the composite API and what it does. The way you have to set it up, I can probably cover that in a little bit more detail. So for the other use cases, you can just basically use user ID password as well for the authentication. You can obviously use OAuth as well. But for this one, you need to create a connected app on the Salesforce side. So basically on your Salesforce org, you need to go in here and you need to create a connected app. So I can show you what the connected app looks like. So this is the MuleSoft connected app that I'm using here. We can look at the details, but basically a connected app lets you interact with different APIs, and basically it's based on the consumer key and secret concept to add additional security. So in this case, for any connected app that I set up, I get a consumer key and I get a consumer secret. And this is what I need to use in this case here when I'm configuring this particular connection to this org. I need to put in this client key, consumer key, and consumer secret. And as you can see, there's different OAuth flavors, but this processor only uses OAuth on the back. So you have to have some flavor of OAuth. So I'm using the simplest one, which is the OAuth username password. Any questions on this one? I apologize for the example not working. It's probably something in my transform.
Yeah, no worries at all, Sarah. So we have a question from Wellington. Where did you find the S object structure of the output of transformation processor?
So the input that it's going to take in here, this one is documented in Salesforce. But the transformation from retrieving it and to inserting it to this format is obviously trial and error, right? Like you have to figure out depending on your use case and depending on which objects and things you're taking. But like Salesforce does document the different composite resources and the format. So this is the link. You can find the details, but it will tell you the structure, the data structure that Salesforce expects. If you go here, so see you have, it shows you for the different ones that you're using, but you have the information available here. So here's S object tree. You can see request body. So this is basically the starting point, how I got it. And this will match up to what you're seeing in the project that I had as well. So if you look here, this lines up. You basically need attributes. You need to define the object type. You need to define a reference ID, and then you need to have your records nested in here. So it's all documented here.
Thank you, Sarah, for that.
Okay, no worries.
We don't have any more questions, so we can proceed, Sarah.
All right. Um, okay, that was the composite API. Next, we're gonna cover the streaming API. So streaming API enables streaming of events using push technology, and basically it's a pub/sub model. So it lets you subscribe for events in real time or push events in real time. So it supports different event types, which includes push topics, generic events, platform events, and change data capture. These are all Salesforce specific technologies. So you use streaming API in MuleSoft when you want MuleSoft to consume an event that has been published in Salesforce. So suppose you have to listen for something happening in Salesforce in real time and then trigger an action to downstream systems. That's where you will use the streaming API. And then you can also do the reverse, where you can publish events through Salesforce from MuleSoft, making use of the streaming API. So we're going to cover a very, very simple use case. In this case, we're going to use what is called change data capture. So change data capture is a functionality that's available in Salesforce. It's purely configuration. You don't need to do any coding in Salesforce, but basically when you go to setup, and I'm going to show you how you would do it in Salesforce, you specify the object you want to do change data capture on. And change data capture means if there's any change in data for that specific object, it will automatically trigger a notification. It will push an event from Salesforce automatically. And then we're just going to be listening to that specific channel, subscribe to that channel in MuleSoft. So this again, we have a pre-built connector in the MuleSoft processors here. So I'm gonna stop this project. Okay. So basically, if you look in here, if I go into the details for this one, once I configure my Salesforce org, it's automatically going to pull in the streaming channels that I have available. So in this case, in my org, I've only set up change data capture for my account object. And then you have different replay options. Sorry, this is started up in debug mode. So I'm going to show you what the Salesforce org looks like next. So if you go in setup, you basically have change data capture available under integration. So basically, it's very simple from Salesforce setup. You basically just choose the object you want to do change data capture on. So in this case, I've selected just account. So if we saw in the project, I only had the channel specific for account showing up there. If I was to have change data capture on a different object, I would just need to add it here, and it would automatically create a channel for me to subscribe to on the backend. There are certain limits to this as well. I think by default, you have 5 objects on which you can have change data capture. If you need to have additional objects for change data capture, there is an additional cost associated with it in Salesforce. So now I can see it's running. So I'm just, all I need to basically do to trigger a change data capture is if I go to an account, and if I either insert an account or I update an account, it should trigger the change data capture. So if I go to this record, say, and I add, say, if I update maybe the phone number, let's see, if I update that to this and I save it, that should trigger the event. So if we go in here, we can see that it's returning a payload. I'm just gonna copy that out. Show the video. Actually, let me put it in the chat so you can all see it. So if you look into here, it's returning the entire payload. It's returning a schema. It's showing you the phone number, and it's showing what got changed. It's showing the entity name equals to account. It's showing the change type to me as well. In this case, change type is update because I did an update. I didn't do an insert. If it was an insert, it would show me an insert. In that case, it would look a little different, the payload. And it's showing me the fields that got changed as well. It's showing me I changed just the phone field and I changed the last modified date. So over here, change fields are phone and last modified date. And it's showing me the transaction as well, and it's showing me the record ID as well. So if I modified multiple records, obviously it would trigger, it would include the multiple records in the payload, and it would show me what got changed for each and every single record. So you can see that was like super simple, but it's like such a convenient and easy way. If you need to sync data between two systems in real time, this is a really good use case for using the streaming API. You can listen to the change that happened for that object, and then you can immediately trigger it to downstream systems. Do we have any questions on this one, Neeraj?
Question, I think, Sarah.
Okay.
Shiva is asking, can you show me streaming channel inside Salesforce?
Streaming for so change data capture, the way it's set up is it automatically creates a streaming channel, so I don't have to do any setup. All I did for this specific use case for change data capture was I enabled the uh, accounts to have change data capture on it, which automatically created a channel. I'm sure if you use a metadata API or you use something else to look in the backend, you would be able to see it. But there's like no visual place in Salesforce to see that. You can see the channel here. I think you can probably see it in Workbench as well, but here is where you will see the streaming channel. So the streaming channel is based on data changing, and it's for account change event. So let me see if I can show you. If I enable it for another object, it will automatically show up in. So I went in, and if I said, say, I wanted to have change data capture for my cases as well, I save it, and then if I go back here, it might take a moment to pull it up. So you can see it automatically is listening. It has showing the option on the backend. Automatically, a streaming channel got created for the case change event. And I just need to basically select, if I want to listen for changes on case, I will just select that as a streaming channel.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you.
Sure. I think I am pretty much at the end of the presentation. I think I have just some useful resources I put in the backend. So this is the link for getting the Salesforce APIs for Postman. It's very, very useful. It will show you all the structure of the APIs. It'll be in Postman. So if you want to look around at the APIs on the backend, that's a great resource. There's Salesforce developer documentation for the APIs. Then there's the tool that we talked about, Workbench, the web-based tool, cloud-based tool for interacting with Salesforce, and the REST API. And then this is the link to my blog. It covers a lot of these specific use cases in more detail, probably, that we talked about. And then there's Trailhead, obviously, for for people in MuleSoft ecosystem that want to learn about Salesforce. Trailhead is your best bet. So next we're doing Q&A, Neeraj?
Yes, Sarah. So